Good evening. I'd like to call this meeting to order. First of all, disclosures of interest. And if any members who would like to declare a disclosure of interest. Councillor Lauer.
Thank you, Councillor Heen. I will be declaring a conflict with item 1 of report DSE 2002, as I have a business interest in that area.
Thank you. Mayor Clark.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, I'm declaring on departmental item number 1 with respect to delegated authority. I have a business that has a seasonal contract for land use in front of my business that would fall under this proposed resolution. Thank you.
Thank you. And I will be declaring a conflict of interest on the heritage designation of 136 West Street North, as I live just a couple of doors up from that particular property. So, any others? Thank you. Moving on. First of all, Happy New Year. This is our first meeting back in the new year, so I hope you all had a good holiday and welcome back to our council business. And because it's our first meeting of the new year, we have a lot of minutes. So I need a second. We need to move the minutes for November 22nd. Oh, pardon me. So it's just a verbal approval again. And the first one is the 136 West Street North, and I'll ask Councillor Cam. Oh, I'm sorry. I need. This is my first one on for a couple of years, so I'm floundering a bit. So we have a motion to rise from our first motion from closed session. I need a mover and a seconder. Moved by Councillor Follis and seconded by Councillor Lauer. That this committee recommends to council.
He declares, but he doesn't act on it.
I need another seconder. Seconded by Councillor Eamon. That. First meeting of the new year. We're all getting used to it. That this committee recommends to council that is recommended in confidential report DSE 2020-02, dated January 7th, 2020, from the Development Services and Engineering Department regarding the potential acquisition of a property for a future road and servicing opportunity. Option 1 be adopted as set out in the report, and that $148,900 be allocated from the land acquisition reserve for the due diligence, appraisal, surveying, and acquisition of the subject property. Any comments? All those in favor? It is carried. Now, welcome back, Councillor Lauer. So our first topic is the heritage designation. So, Councillor Campbell, I'll ask you to take the chair.
First time in the big chair. Yeah. Okay, so this brings us... Pardon? All right. This brings us to the item regarding 185 West Street. Sorry, 136 West Street North. And I believe Mr. Dugan will be speaking to this one. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. On behalf of the family of the late Quinnifer Brown, the Municipal Heritage Committee respectfully requests that the proposed heritage designation for 136 West Street North under Part 4 of the Municipal Heritage Act be withdrawn. Further to the passing of Ms. Brown, the family requested that the designation be held in abeyance pending resolution of various property and estate-related matters. Most recently, the Municipal Heritage Committee has been advised that the estate does not wish to pursue designation of the property at this time and has therefore requested that the proposed designation be withdrawn. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, and I apologize. I believe I said Dugan, and it's Duggan. First time in the chair. I'm excited. Questions? No questions? My first time in the chair, and there's no question. All right, there we go. Councillor Fallis, thank you.
I'll throw you a quick comment. Just comment on this. I'm the rep for the Municipal Heritage Committee from Council, and unfortunately, this has been withdrawn by the family that put it forward initially. We were really hopeful about this, and we do understand that there were circumstances that didn't allow them to proceed with it, but we hope that this will continue to be on our radar for future heritage designations, and we certainly recognize, the committee as a whole recognize, that the house did have a great deal of cultural value to it and historical value. So again, thanks to the family for the efforts that they did put into it, and yeah, hopefully we'll see it again at the heritage table. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Fallis. Anyone else? Okay, I need a mover and a seconder for the motion that's before us. Moved by Councillor Ainsworth, seconded by Councillor Eamon, that this committee recommends to Council that as recommended in report MHC 20-01 dated January 7th, 2020 from the Municipal Heritage Committee, the proposal to designate the property located at 136 West Street North, known as the Wood House, as a property of cultural heritage value under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act be withdrawn at this time. All in favor? And that is carried. Thank you.
We turned it off. Thank you. So the next item on our agenda is the report from the Public Arts Committee. And we have Jacqueline Shatska and Stephanie Stanton. If you would like to speak to this, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just going to say it's my pleasure to introduce the Chair of the Art and Public Places Committee, Stephanie Stanton, who will present the report.
Thank you.
Hello, through you, Madam Chair. The purpose of this report is to respond to Council referral date October 8th, 2019, for a report from the Art and Public Places Committee on the proposed sculpture donation from Mr. McKee. The proposed donation to the City of Orillia includes 6 sculptures, 5 to 10 feet tall, made from Dor Oliver Long patterns. The patterns incorporated into sculptures were used to cast molten metal at the Dor Oliver Long factory. Schedule A of the report provides a depiction of how the patterns were used within the process. The artist would like to see the sculptures displayed within the Orillia Recreation Center. Dor Oliver Long was one of the leading suppliers of a variety of mining equipment within North America, located across the street from the center at 174 West Street South. Acceptance of the donation of a work of art is subject to the conditions set out in the City of Orillia Art and Public Places policy. And the Art and Public Places Committee reviewed the referral at its meeting on November the 12th, 2019, and it is recommending at this time that the donation, along with the acquisition of public art in general for the Orillia Recreation Center, wait until it is open, until the site is open and operational. This will allow the staff and the committee time to see how the space functions and where the opportunities may lie for public art to go. It will also give the committee time to review the donation with Mr. McKee to ensure that it meets the criteria set out in our policy.
Thank you. Are there any questions from our councillors? Councillor Sapola.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is really, really important to our community, seeing that the manufacturing industry was one of the first in Canada to be able to, and we were basically the hub for manufacturing. When I was in South Africa, there were pieces of work for the train, and it was made from Orillia at Door Oliver Long, so it's all over the world. And I really believe that Mr. McKee's offer to us is very honorable. And I don't disagree that we should wait and see how it goes, but I think we should really communicate with Mr. McKee that, at least from my perspective, that we should be interested in it and see how it works for the whole project, especially out, especially out in the park itself. There's some really, really good opportunities, and it could be a tourist draw to the area as well, because there's some of the pieces there are fabulous and that. So I would be supporting. I would love to support that we purchase or take possession of them now, but I think the idea to wait is a good one. So thank you.
Councillor Lauer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm thinking along the same lines as Ralph. I understand the idea of waiting and just seeing how that. Hello, Stephanie, by the way. Waiting to see how that building operates. That makes perfect sense to me. But what I wouldn't want to do is dissuade Mr. McKee from giving these items to the City of Orillia. I think of all the places they could go. I understand that you were looking at it in the context of that actual building, but this building we are in currently was part of that industrial hub. Certainly, I would think it would be appropriate to have a couple in here, and certainly our library has spaces as well. So I guess my question, after that long ramble, is how do we do that? How do we encourage Mr. McKee to keep that offer in front of us? Not say no, thank you, because it doesn't fit the we can't find the space in the rec center. How do we encourage the idea that we do have those at our disposal and can use in other ways?
Through you, Madam Chair, he's had them in his backyard for some time. Like a number of years. So I think to ask him to hang on just a bit longer, I don't think would be inappropriate. And certainly that we've led into the fact that we will be discussing with him next steps. Just alluding to part of our policies, we do have to make sure we get a recommendation from him as to how we will maintain them as well. So there's a bit of a due process there too. But so certainly starting the conversation with him to say, yes, we want them. We just need a kind of a scope of work and how we're going to put them into place. Yeah.
Thank you. Mayor Clark.
Thank you very much, and through you, Madam Chair, to our guests. Thank you very much for that presentation. I know I did so informally in the hallway, but a formal welcome to the hood. I think it's a fabulous offer. Tim and I, Councillor Lauer and I had the opportunity to go and visit the sculptures probably about 4 years ago or so, I guess, and saw them on his property, and they really are a really neat and unique representation of our foundry or industrial past. I have a piece that's made up of similar items just up in my office, and it is a conversation piece. Anyway, so I just hope it, however, we defer this until the rec center is open and the decision's looked at again, that we convey our gratitude to him for the very kind offer. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments? Do we have a motion before us? This committee recommends to Council that report APPC 20-01, dated January the 7th, 2020, from the Art and Public Places Committee regarding the proposed sculpture donation for the Orillia Recreation Centre from Mr. Jimmy McKee be received from information. Councillor Cipolla.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm wondering through you to staff if there's a way that we can ask Mr. McKee to hold these for us for 3 months, 6 months, a year as part of the motion. I think it would be appropriate, and as Councillor Lauer said, I don't want to see them go somewhere else. My dad worked for Laura Oliver for many years, and a lot of Orillians and a lot of history is behind that particular, and some of those patterns that we saw, that you saw, Mayor Clark and Councillor Lauer, you know, some of the people that are still alive worked on them, on those patterns. So I'm wondering if there is an opportunity to put an amendment to ask them to hold them for whatever you decide, a year, 6 months, in order that we will take him up on his offer, but we need to find out how we're going to use them.
First of all, Ms. Sochka, if you could respond to that, and then...
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. I just did want to note that when we did have the call to artists recently for the Stack Art Gallery that will be in the Orillia Recreation Centre, Mr. McKee was one of the artists that submitted his work, which does use the door Oliver Long, some of them as part of the framing and within the artwork. So there will be pieces of that within the new exhibit that will be set to be launched and opened with the new Recreation Centre.
And Councillor Cipolla, do you want to move an amendment then? Or?
If I can get a seconder, yes, I would.
Councillor Lau, are you willing to second it? Are you okay with that, Mayor Clark? You were next in line.
I think, well, my question, my comment was just, wasn't echoed because I didn't make it. Ms. Sochka mentioned the comment I was going to make that Mr. McKee has 2 pieces going into on the stack wall. But I do have a comment on the amendment, but I think it would be appropriate if I wait, I'll comment if it's brought forward.
Okay. Councillor Lauer.
Thank you, Councillor Heen. Through you, sorry, just to clarify, so as we go forward, obviously we'll wait till the building is open and we will assess, and I'm assuming it's going to take months to assess. It's not the first day it's open. We're going to sort this out. Okay, so if we get down the road 3 months and we've decided, okay, we can use 1 piece there, what would be the process for encouraging Mr. McKee to donate them to the city without the idea that they had to go in that building?
Through you, Madam Chair, it already has been requested as a donation to the city of Orillia. So we just need to look at in terms of, what would be the commitment for maintenance of the piece, what are the pieces made out of, how can they be displayed safely. There's things like egress in a building such as that we have to ensure fire is okay with those pieces and whatnot. So it will take some time in order to assess the piece. And I believe it already has been presented as a donation to the city of Orillia. We're just going through the steps in terms of accession.
If I could just follow up then, so they are accepted by the city basically, and what you're talking about are more logistics as in where they're placed so that there's no fire issues, et cetera, and it would just be a matter of finding a spot for them. The reason I'm asking is I would think if you're going to say yes, then that would make the amendment redundant.
Provided that they can be displayed safely and, in a place that meets also the donor's request or the donor's vision of the piece, I would say that they have been assessed. We just do have to go through that process, and that does have to come through council.
Thank you.
Through you, Madam Chair, I think if I'm, just for clarity's sake, what I'm hearing is that there's certainly a lot of interest in the pieces that have been offered to the municipality. What I'm hearing from staff is that there needs to be an evaluation. And once that evaluation is done, then that evaluation comes back to council, but council ultimately has to approve the acceptance of the piece with all the information that you need in order to make that decision as to whether you're going to accept. Is that, if I can, through you, Madam Chair, just confirm that that is what I've heard?
Through you, Madam Chair, that is correct.
May I ask a question? Was there not an evaluation already done? Was that part of your report by Sotheby's?
A complete accession was not done. At this point, we felt that we needed to report back to council to let you know where we were at and that we would like more time in order to do that process, to work with the donor and to work with staff, and also to see what the facility can accommodate.
Thank you. Councillor Fowlis.
Thanks. Through the chair, just kind of through looking at the images and understanding these pieces, they certainly seem like a big benefit, that a wonderful gift that that's been offered to the city. If we accept this as information today, is there any risk of losing those pieces?
Ms. Sochka.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. I guess I do not believe the donor is not intending not to donate the pieces at this time. And I don't think at this point we can accept the donation as is until we complete the accession form. I don't know if that completely answers the question, but we can't accept the donation until we've done our due diligence.
Councillor Sepola.
The amendment could also say that we accept them in principle, subject to council approval, 6 months, whatever time you need. I don't know how much time do you need to assess everything.
Councillor Mayor Clark.
Thank you. I was waiting to make my comment in the case that the amendment was brought forward. It has not been, so if you allow me to address this. Again, this is a committee that we have established, and I think we need to respect their, to the degree that we can, and agree with it. And I think there is agreement on this tonight, accept their recommendation. To ask somebody to hold on to something for a number of months or whatever that might be, the better part of a year, in hopes that they might be accepted, I think is unfair to the potential donor. I mean, if an opportunity came up, I'm not saying there's one imminent, but if an opportunity came up, I think it would be within his right to divest, or to sell them. So I'm just not sure if it's fair if we're not accepting it. And yet to even accept them in principle, I think maybe going against the recommendation of the committee. Maybe I would ask the chair of the committee to make a comment on whether that would rub the committee the wrong way to accept them in principle.
Ms. Stanton.
Through you, Madam Chair, I don't foresee any issue with accepting them in principle. I think our intent is to accept, but the question, I guess, lies in where are we going to put them? If we accept them and take them in hand now, where are we going to store them until we have said place to put them? And thirdly, and this is kind of the big one, is making sure that we have the measures in place to maintain them, which is a big portion of our policy in order to acquire art in any format. We have to be able to maintain them to the standard that the artist has requested. So,
Mayor Clark and then Councillor Raymond.
If you would come back to me, please, Madam Chair.
Councillor Raymond.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've been listening. If I'm correct, Chair Stephanie, there's no question about the artistic integrity of these pieces and that their legitimacy in representing the foundry history of our community. what I hear you're saying is that there's a whole bunch of potential issues about where, how, and what means, potential costs ongoing, and so on and so forth. So accepting art in principle is totally appropriate, I think, artistic principle at this point. But what we are really going to have to come to grips with are the implications of what we ultimately have to do with this. And if I'm understanding, it's the committee's intention to work hand in glove with Jimmy through whatever questions, whatever discussions are required to do that. If the current motion doesn't transmit that commitment of our community to Mr. McKee and to our committee, then we need to modify it. But if the committee is comfortable that they have it in hand, I'm quite comfortable with the motion as is.
Mayor Clark now.
Thank you. Just to close out my comments. I would agree with largely with what Councillor Iman has said. The only issue I have with asking him to hold on to the pieces or accept them in principle is if, and I don't see the circumstance where this would be the case, but if it did come down the road that the decision was to not accept them, then we've had somebody hold on to these for virtually no reason, and I think that throws up too much ambiguity. So I'm comfortable with the recommendation the way it is, and I think the committee probably has more than the ability to convey the committee and the city's gratitude for the offer, and hopefully that's something that will be accepted in the future.
Councillor Cipolla.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just concerned that Council has not accepted it at all. This was the first time it's been before Council, if I'm not mistaken. So, I mean, I'm sure that staff can come up with the proper wording for an amendment that would allow you to investigate them. And if Mr. McKee comes back and says, no, I don't want to hold them, then we're not obligated, and he's not obligated to give them to us either. So there's got to be a proper wording to do that. I just want to portray our requirements to Mr. McKee that we are interested in, whether they go in Centennial Park or Veterans Park or whatever, that we are interested in. And Councillor Lauer had the right idea. You know, they could go many places within our community. And so I think there's a proper wording for it, but the way this is information doesn't give them any suggestion that we're even interested in it.
Madam CAO.
Through you, Madam Chair, if I may, what I've understood from the chair of the committee is that they're in communication with Mr. McKee and that they're in the process of evaluating all of that. So I'm understanding from the committee's perspective that this motion before you is sufficient to enable those conversations to go forward. I would suspect that the chair of the committee would also certainly share the discussion that has occurred at council committee with respect to generally the interest in the pieces. So I'm not quite sure, unless there's some suggestions from members of council about a further wording, but it's my understanding that the wording that you have before you is sufficient enough for the committee to continue those conversations with Mr. McKee.
Thank you. Councillor Lauer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I'm satisfied with the way it's written up here. I'm assuming that we will not wake up one morning and get a note saying that we turned them down without it coming here. So as long as that's going to happen, I'm quite happy with that. Councillor
Fawless.
Thanks. Through the chair, just in talking with some members of the clerk's department before, and please correct me if I'm wrong in any of this, my understanding is that there's a letter following the committee that's usually drafted, sent to, it would likely be sent to the artist. Could we, and I don't know if this has to be enshrined or anything, but could we make sure that the clerk's department work with the chair of the Commemorative Arts Committee to draft that letter to ensure that the interest in the piece is expressed? And I defer to the clerk's department on whether they think that's worth doing, whether that's possible. Thanks.
Madam Deputy Clerk.
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, that is correct, Councillor Follis. As a matter of course, if this goes through to Council next week and is adopted, we do send out correspondence. We would send out correspondence to Mr. McKee, and we would work with the Chair of the Committee and Ms. Sachka to draft appropriate wording for next steps.
Okay. Thanks very much.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor, and we need a mover and a seconder for it. Moved by Councillor Eben, seconded by Councillor Ainsworth. Is there any further discussion? All those in favour? It is carried. Thank you very much, ladies. Okay, so our next item on the agenda is the affordable housing strategy. And Ms. Lewis, are you taking the lead on this one?
Thank you, Madam Chair. As part of the 2020 budget deliberations, Council established an affordable housing reserve, and $80,000 was allocated to this new reserve. However, at this time, no policy framework has been established to provide guidance on how these funds are to be used. The report before you recommends eligibility criteria and a suite of municipal incentives to assist with the creation of more affordable housing units. I'll just quickly go through the eligibility criteria recommended is that the project be located in the city, that the organization be government or not-for-profit, that the units be affordable for a minimum of 20 years, that for rental housing, the project also have received funding from CMHC or the county, for rental housing that the rents not exceed 80% of average market rent, and for home ownership that the purchase price will result in an annual accommodation cost of not more than 30% of the gross household income of the occupants, and the occupants' gross annual household income will not exceed the city's median household income. It's recommended that the suite of incentives be offered that donating city land, if there is land available, a grant for purchasing land, a grant for city development charges, a grant for building and planning and engineering fees up to $25,000, grant for community benefits, and reduced securities. Council direction is requested with respect to whether or not you want to offer a tax holiday for new affordable housing projects, and it is recommended that the Affordable Housing Committee develop a process for accepting, reviewing, and evaluating eligible housing proposals and report back to Council with respect to this process. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll open the floor up for questions. Councillor Fowlis.
Thanks. Through the chair, prior to this meeting, I have expressed an interest in moving forward option B. If there, I am flexible as well. If there's any other council colleagues that are interested in moving forward B, C, or D, I'd certainly be willing to second that. Thanks.
Councillor Cloustra.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, to staff. I'm not in favor of a tax holiday for these bills. We're offering lots of incentives for people to build affordable housing in the city, and as long as we're not going to be overlapping with any of the incentive programs offered by the county currently, with the tax holiday, we already were faced with a situation with a property on University Avenue for a large development, and currently the province and the federal government are not giving any grants to municipalities for those type of projects to cover the costs of paying the property taxes. You do need the property taxes to maintain the city and the roads and everything like that, but if the $80,000 in the fund was maybe used for, if some of the proponents or even some of the people that are in the affordable housing units need tax relief or something like that, maybe that might be a program we could come forward with. But at this time, I do appreciate all the incentives, but I'm not in favor of the no tax holiday.
Any other? Councillor Lauer.
Thank you, Councillor Hain. A couple questions just before any comments. Under municipal incentives, item E, it talks about grants in the amount equal to all or part of the applicable community benefits to be funded from a reserve. How do we see that community benefit thing being defined and quantified, and how that's going to unfold?
Through you, Madam Chair, the Planning Act has not yet been proclaimed with respect to community benefits, so this is a bit preemptive, but certainly the legislation has been passed. And so community benefits would essentially, instead of parkland dedication, there would be a charge for community benefits, which is all related to the soft services component, which is partially collected right now by your development charges and partially your parkland dedication. So it will, in effect, be a charge. So this is just trying to address, we know the Planning Act is going to be changing to incorporate this community benefit, so we're just trying to get ahead of the curve.
Mr. Sugden?
Through you, Madam Chair, further to what Ms. Lewis just said as well, Council will recall through the 2020 budget process, there was a capital budget item approved for a community benefits background study, and so that we can develop the required community benefits bylaw. What we're waiting for is the Planning Act to become enabled, and then we'll move on with that project. So,
okay, if I may. Okay, so I'm not understanding something here. Okay, when I first heard the idea of community benefits, I thought that was an evaluation of the project in regards to what community benefit it provided. But it sounds like I got that turned around.
Mr. Sugden.
Through you, Madam Chair, I'll start, and if I miss anything, Ms. Lewis will finish up. But so community benefits right now are defined in our official plan, and they give examples of what community benefits might be, and it's used from a density bonusing perspective in the official plan policies. All of that is about to change as a result of the changes to the Planning Act. But as an example, if a developer wants to get more units on a site through greater height, they can provide community benefits that they wouldn't normally provide in the normal form of parkland dedication or the normal form of development charges, et cetera. They could provide public art. They could provide affordable housing. They could provide any number of things, improvements that we wouldn't normally be able to get from them in order to get the extra height. The new community benefits may have similar types of categories like that, but we don't know yet until we go through this community benefits background study to determine what they are. One of the types of soft costs that will be lumped in to the community benefits bylaw will be parkland dedication. So it's just removed from a separate parkland dedication bylaw and put into a community benefits charges bylaw. Other types of benefits charges will likely be calculated in there as well.
Yeah, thank you. I have comments, but I'll let everybody else go.
Thank you. Councillor Emond.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have a question, but I have a comment. And my comment is that I'm in line with my colleague across the table in not being enthusiastic about our using our taxes, household taxes as a benefit for this sort of thing. The more I thought about this over the weekend, the more complex I realized the issue of affordable housing is. It's mixed up with the fact that we have a very low income level in this community, and coupled with that, we have rising assessment across our community, which is pushing taxes up for a number of communities, even though I understand in the aggregate we're supposed to have a neutral impact. It only seems that when we add our piece on, it goes up. And I know that I have constituents who've been in their homes for many years and are finding that the annual increase in taxes, whether they're on the waterfront in a $500,000 or $700,000 home, or they're uptown and something that's certainly more reasonable, is pressing them because they're on a fixed income. And they see the time in their life, unfortunately, when their housing cost is going to go beyond their ability to afford to stay in the homes that they're in. That's a problem of low-income housing in our community in many ways. We've seen the tremendous enthusiasm that our community has extended for the homeless in our community, and the support that Building Hope has achieved, and the fact that they have been able to extract from the county, from the province, from federal government and from our municipality a significant economic contribution to resolving, in part, one component of the housing problem. My view is that this whole area needs greater exploration. I was reading with interest the article in the Toronto Star last week about the Star writer, I think, yes it is, who a number of years ago wrote a book and turned the windfall that he got from the book, or at least the tremendous amount of energy and effort he put into writing the book and its sale, into buying 4 houses in Niagara Street, which is a street in downtown Toronto, where he's maintained those places and he rents them out today. In downtown Toronto, 1-bedroom apartments, second floor $800 a month, ground floor $900 a month. The comparable rents for that kind of housing in that part of Toronto ranges anywhere close to $1,800 to $2,500 a month. And his rationale is, look, I paid for the houses, they returned to me a fair investment. Now, I'm not naive enough to believe that the profit that people can make from real estate is going to be forgiven just because they feel badly about housing in this community. But I also recognize that over the years, the county came to the conclusion that investing in incentives in the private sector for low-income housing didn't work. Because eventually, as we're seeing on Berry Road, those homes fall out of the low-income category. And so the county embarked on a strategy of we're going to build our own. And we may not be able to build as many, but when we build them, we'll own them and we can manage them in that category forever. And the city of Orillia contributes, I don't know, it's a couple of $1 million a year, $1.8 million a year in capital to that program. And on the horizon in this community, right around the corner from where Councillor Lauer and Councillor Heen live, we are going to see a low-income development emerge over the next 2 to 3, hopefully no longer than 5 years. The county has a report that is quite interesting and enlightening in that manner, and we're looking forward to the county debating that and passing that report. So I think this community is already doing a lot. What I think we want to show is that we want to continue to be an initiator of this, but I'm not sure we have yet grasped the best way to do that. I'm comfortable with the criteria. I'm comfortable with the list of potentials. I just don't want to block us in so that we are giving up tax revenues in the future, which are so absolutely necessary to support that kind of housing, as it is any kind of housing and any kind of business that comes into our community that will create the jobs that potentially will address the other side of the equation, and that is those who are unable to earn an income at a level in our community. So for the moment, I would be supporting putting option A into that blank in the second part of the motion before us.
Thank you, Councillor Raymond. Councillor Lauer, did you want to?
Thank you, Councillor Keane. Yeah, I'm kind of thinking down the same line that we need to do a little bit more work on this because, first off, we're saying this only applies to nonprofits, and so that narrows the field hugely. I mean, that takes out the entire, private sector. Unless they're willing to run a nonprofit business, which I'm suspect that not many of them want to do that. But also, it's like my heart opens up a lot more for things like Hillcrest, where we're talking about people being housed for 30% of their income, right? Basically, if they're on ODSP, then all their rent is geared to that reality. Which is hugely different than affordable housing at 80% of the market. And I'm also not comfortable with the idea that this is a 20-year term. Again, you're talking about a nonprofit, but still the eventuality, it could be exactly what you have with the private sector, which it made me discover how fast 20 years goes by, because we're now looking at them coming off, and it seemed a long time ago. And I remember when we did it, thinking, well, there, that takes care of that forever, but in fact, it doesn't, right? So. As I say, I'm not quite at the point where I can say I like option A or option B or option C, but I think I would like this discussed more at another level and maybe refined just a little bit, because as I say, I'm not really comfortable with some of the parameters we're set. The other thing too that's really important in this whole process is the tax holiday is a great idea, and when you give it to people, and we've got a couple of examples of that going on currently, they willingly accept it, and it's a wonderful thing, and off they go. And then when that expires in 10 years, it comes as a complete shock to them that, in fact, it's no longer a holiday, and in fact, the fact you were being relieved of $20,000 worth of taxes previously, you suddenly have to work into your budget. And then that ends up coming back in other ways to the city, or causes some pretty significant problems for those people. And as I say, we've got a couple of examples of that happening, so it's not like it's an isolated incident. That's another part of the whole process. If you were going to go down that road, there needs to be some real benchmark wake-up points where people are, being made aware that this is going to happen and that it's going to expire. So I'm not sure if I've come up with anything other than I'm not quite comfortable with any of the options and would like to see this discussed further.
May I be allowed to make one comment from the chair? Or would you like me to leave the chair? Regarding the tax holiday, the one comment I would make is that I would not be in favor of a total tax holiday, but I really like the option D of a 5-year phase-in, because it allows people to adjust to the period of the fact that it's not all of a sudden it's going to hit them all of a sudden that the rents are going to go up, but it's phased in over a period of time. So it gives them a chance to adjust to it, and then the rents aren't all of a sudden a massive hit at one time. And I think that makes total sense to any program. So kudos to you, Jill, for thinking to put that in as an idea. So at this point, what is Council's desire as to where do we wish to go from here? Mayor Clark.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll keep my comments brief. Certainly one heck of an issue here and elsewhere around the province and around the country and beyond. We do indeed have a low inventory of affordable housing, and a corresponding low vacancy rate. And of course, when that happens, you have increased demand and the prices go up and makes it even less affordable. There are many different levels of affordable housing, and I think the criteria defined in this report addresses the ones that are more close to my heart, and that's the transitional type stuff that would be with support services that would be run by non-for-profits or even the emergency shelter, the RGI stuff and the rent geared to income, of which was already alluded to, takes place at Hillcrest, which is a wonderful example of affordable housing. And I also understand that even though we are contributing $1.8 million a year to the county for such services, and as Councillor Iman mentioned, we will enjoy the benefit of that investment as it comes around to be our turn in the next couple of years up on West Street. And I also understand that without legislative changes, I'm hoping at the provincial level, but even at the municipal level, that the issue that we have probably isn't going to get a heck of a lot better. I'm meeting with other mayors in the ward of the county just on this issue on a semi-regular basis, and we're looking at models even around the world, and there aren't a lot of terrific examples of where there has been great demonstrated success. So I'm probably along the lines of supporting option A. I like some of the criteria captured here, but also I think that would perhaps allow the committee to continue looking at the document and seeing if it can evolve, as Councillor Lauer has alluded to as well. So I'd be, if somebody wants to put option A forward, I would support that. Thank you.
Is it Councillor Raymond? So do I have a mover and a seconder to adopt option A? Mayor Clark and Councillor Raymond?
I can wait till you read the motion if you wish.
So I have a motion on the floor, moved by Mayor Clark, seconded by Councillor Raymond, that this committee recommends to Council that is recommended in Report DSE 20-03, dated January the 7th, 2020, from the Development Services and Engineering Department, the eligibility criteria and municipal incentives for affordable housing be approved as set out in the report, and that option A regarding tax holidays as the municipal incentive for affordable housing be adopted as set out in the report, and that staff work with the affordable excuse me, and that staff work with the Affordable Housing Committee to develop a process for accepting, reviewing, and evaluating affordable housing proposals to determine the degree for which such proposals are eligible for municipal incentives, and report back to Council on the new evaluation process. Mayor Clark?
Thank you. It's more of a comment than moving this forward or not. It's with respect to one of the suggested criteria in the report about a 20-year, a potential 20-year term of defined affordability. So I think 20 years ago, that probably would be something, if I knew then what I know now, I probably wouldn't support. What I would say now, and this is going to sound more like an attempt at humor, which I'm poor at the best of times, but it's an observation I've been making for the last number of years since coming to this office, and that is with the proliferation of seniors' housing being built within the city of Orillia, and it is an absolute proliferation in my mind, that in 20 years from now, or 20 years from 2 or 3 or 4 years from now, as the demographic that is in those seniors' homes and moving into those seniors' homes leave those seniors' homes, that I do believe that we will have a significant amount of affordable housing on the market then. So I do believe that the 20-year term can be viewed differently now than it could be 10, 15, 20 years ago. And that's my only comment. Thank you.
Councillor Eamon and then Councillor Fowles.
Madam Chair, I thank the mayor for reflecting on my age, and that 20 years is a lifetime. Thank you.
Councillor Fowles.
Thanks. I just points of clarity. The first was if we pursue this particular option, is there a time where, is there a time limit on it? Do we revisit it at some point? Just kind of curious around that.
So, Councillor, you wanted an amendment to add at this time where?
If I could, Madam Chair, just clarify maybe through the clerk, does that, what I don't want to do, what I wouldn't want to happen here is to have this idea closed down completely. As I say, there could be some eventual discussions that prove something out that might allow us to change it. So if we just did add at this time to that second paragraph, does that allow this to come back without a reconsideration?
Councillor Deputy Clerk.
Through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor Lauer, yes, that is correct. Typically, we add the verbiage at this time in order to prevent a reconsideration scenario coming forward. However, each and every scenario is different, so we need to evaluate that as that time comes. But generally, that is what we add.
Okay, do we have a seconder for Councillor Lauer's amendment? Councillor Klustra. So we have a motion moved by Councillor Lauer, seconded by Councillor Klustra, that the motion now before committee be amended by adding the following at the end of the second paragraph at this time. Councillor Emond.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have no problem with the addition of this, but my hope would be that it's not interpreted by the committee is that 6 months from now they can come back with the same recommendation. I mean, I think the discussion around the table, at least the discussion that I had put on the table, is that I would like that committee to explore this issue a little more broadly and think more strategically about how our community can address the issue of homelessness, not in terms of providing physical facility, but how is it that we could increase our average family income by $20,000 in the next 10 years? What can we do in our community to do that? Building housing isn't going to do that, but that would go a long way to establishing the fact that a lot more people could afford the housing that's already available in our community. So I'm not suggesting that housing isn't a component, but I would like the committee to address this issue somewhat more strategically. And if they interpret that, those representatives on council are on the committee and are taking that back, certainly I know staff is here and will do that, then that's fine. If they'd like to engage some of us who have raised issues, we'd be more than happy to and welcome the opportunity to meet and discuss those things.
Any further discussion around the amendment? All those in favor of the amendment? It is carried. So we are now back to the original original motion. Do you want it reread? Okay, that's fine. All those in favor? It is carried. Thank you. Our next item of business is the real property delegated authority reporting. And yes. And welcome to Laura Thompson.
Thank you. Chapter 251 of the Municipal Code regarding delegated authority provides staff the authority to execute various real property agreements. The report before you includes a list of all agreements executed in 2019 through this authority. Staff has also recommended 2 housekeeping updates for minor issues related to real property definitions and the inclusion of a legal deposit fee in the user fee bylaw for property services. Happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Any questions from council? Councillor Lauer.
Thank you, Councillor Heen. If we did the math on this, so if you took one facility, like say one of the concessions in the park, and compared it to say one of the patios on the main street, is there a square foot equation that matches? Like, are they similar?
Through you. There is a standard rate that's applied for various types of agreements. So, for example, there's a square foot applied for encroachments on municipal road allowances. There is a standard rate applied for sidewalk patios. They are not comparative to each other.
Okay, so they're different kettle of fish.
That is correct.
In the case of a facility being left in place and not operating but left in place, is there rental for storage?
Through you, there is various rental fees. For context, there are multiple departments who are currently delivering real property services, so it depends on the facility that's being rented. Staff are currently preparing a report to come forward to Council Committee regarding bringing consistency to lease fees across various facilities and properties.
Yeah, okay. Where I was just going was, so we have a couple of facilities in the parks that are listed here. Is that just represent while their operating period from June 1st till September 30th or whatever, or is that operating and then we also charge them for storing their facility for the winter?
Through you, Madam Chair, if I may, just as an example, would that be the ice, like for example, the ice cream trailer in Tuttle Park?
Yeah.
Okay. So yes, there are charges for storage. So they are required to pay for storage, but it's not at the same lease rate as they would be paying during the operation of the
Summer.
Of the unit. Yeah.
And as such, then they're not allowed to open, I assume, in the winter.
Through you, Madam Chair, that is correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Cipolla.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Regarding the refreshment stands at the park, with the Centennial Drive being redone and everything else, do we know when the time frame is for that to take place? So if we do these leases, then we're obligated to keep them there if we start in July or August of this year or whatever. So do we know that?
Yes, you.
Through you, Madam Chair, what we'll be doing is evaluating the timeframes and ensuring that the lease coincides with the future development of the waterfront area to ensure that we're not caught with having to wait while that lease expires. So staff will monitor that to ensure that that won't cause any grief.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Okay. Do I have a mover and a seconder for this motion? Moved by Councillor Ainsworth, seconded by Councillor Campbell. You're not running fast enough. Thank you. So, moved by Councillor Ainsworth, seconded by Councillor Campbell, that this committee recommends to Council that report ED 20-01 dated January the 9th, 2020 from the Economic Development Department regarding delegated authority for real property matters exercised by staff in 2019 be received as information, and that Chapter 454 of the City of Orillia Municipal Code, user fees, property services be amended to include the legal deposit fee, and that policy 1.7.1.1 real property policy be amended as set out in Schedule B to the report. Any further comments? All those in favor? It is carried. Okay, the next item of business is our Drinking Water Quality Management System QMS representative. And Renee Roskowski, are you going to do this report for us? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, members of Council. Report ESO 2001 before you tonight seeks Council approval to appoint Tammy Campbell, the City's Environmental Compliance QMS Coordinator, as the Quality Management System Representative for the City's drinking water system. The QMS representative acts to administer and oversee the City's quality management with regards to the drinking water system. The appointment of a QMS representative is a major component of the quality management system and is required under the Safe Drinking Water Act. The appointment reflects the current staffing complement within the Environmental Services and Operations Department. The report also seeks Council's commitment and endorsement of the operational plan for the drinking water system to reflect the currency with the appointment of the QMS representative. I would be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Councillor Lauer.
Thank you, Councillor Heath. So you're not old enough, Renee, but I did live through water, whatever it was called. Walkerton, not Watertown, Walkerton. Right? And the most significant thing that came out of that is that councils should be asking questions and just verifying things. And as a result of that, your department brings forward a water water quality update. So I guess my only question is, Ms. Campbell, is qualified for this position?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, Ms. Campbell is very qualified for this position, and she's gone through training to be oriented to the city's QMS system, and we're very comfortable with her appointment to the role.
Thank you very much.
Any further questions? Okay, do I have a mover and a seconder for this motion? Moved by Councillor Campbell, seconded by Councillor Clustra. That this committee recommends to Council that is recommended in Report ESO 20-01, dated January the 8th, 2020, from the Environmental Services and Operations Department. Tammy Campbell, Environmental Compliance QMS Coordinator, be appointed as the Quality Management System QMS representative for the city's drinking water system, and that the Mayor and Clerk, on behalf of Council, as a requirement of their role as owner, the Director of Environmental Services and Operations, Top Management, and the Environmental Compliance QMS Coordinator, QMS representative, provide their commitment and endorsement of the operational plan by providing signatures on copies of Element 2, Quality Management System Policy, and Element 3, Commitment and Endorsement Attachment, as Attachments A and B of the report. Thank you. Are there any further questions from members of Council? All those in favor? It is carried. Okay, so the next item on our agenda is the BMA Municipal Study. This is one that we look forward to hearing. And Jazz, are you going to take the lead on this one tonight?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. The purpose of this report is to present the BMA study and provide an overall summary of the document and resulting trends. Participation in the study is voluntary, and it provides comparators to other municipalities in Ontario using primarily financial data that the city filed with the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing for the fiscal year ended December 31st, 2018. In addition to financial data, the study compares growth-related factors, taxation, and costs of services. The study is descriptive and does not correlate amounts spent with service level satisfaction. Staff have identified several reporting limitations for readers to keep in mind. These include differences in population, geographic size, and location of the municipality, weather conditions, economic conditions, and demographic mix. Thank you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, questions from members of Council? Councillor Fowlis.
Thanks. Through the chair, I had just a quick question for you. I believe it was regarding family income. I was just curious, does that include pensions and RRSPs? Just a point of interest there.
Ms. Radigan?
Through you, Madam Chair. I don't actually have an exact answer in front of me. I do believe it does include like ODSB payments and items like that. Pension, I'm not 100% positive if it does include it. It doesn't actually identify specifically household income, but I will double check in the study. It may.
Thank you. Mayor Clark.
Thank you. The only, I have some other comments, but the only comment I would make on that is whether it does or not, and we're, Councillor Falls and I were just having a little sidebar. certainly, I think as Councillor Human has mentioned in the past, there are some seniors in our community, for example, who have good wherewithal but low family or low average income because they're living off of pension or investment funds, and therefore that may not be reflected in overall household income. But that would be true of all the communities in the BMA study. So even if it isn't or isn't included, it probably wouldn't change our ranking. I have a couple of comments. I thank you for your work on doing a précis version of the comprehensive BMA report, which I look forward to every year. I think it's not the be-all, end-all in terms of knowing how we are doing, but it certainly is one of those tools that I like to use. The core service review we did last year is also one of those tools. This is an annual event. I see the number has gone up to about 110 municipalities now, so us and 109 other municipalities. With respect to property tax, I do see that we are kind of almost dead center, it appears, in 3 low categories, 3 high categories, and we are ranked in 6 categories in the mid area. And on cost of service, a comment would be our comparators by population include municipalities between 30 and 99,000 people. Well, if I have 99,000 people and in one community and 30,000 or 31,116 or 61 in another, which Orillia was alleged to have in 2016, the costs per person of delivering those services would be higher in the lower municipalities because we can't enjoy the economies of scale. With respect to reserves, because the 3 things I'd like to just finish off mentioning are reserves, which is kind of a source of internal debt, our external debt, and our overall financial situation. I think in 2013, our annual reserve contribution was somewhere around $7.6 million, and I believe as of this particular year we're in now, I think we're over $16 million per year contribution, which I think is commendable. I think it was a conscious decision by council each year to increase our contributions to reserves. But also in the last number of years, we had in queue and continue to finish off some significant capital projects. There was discussion a few years ago whether to use how we were going to fund that. And at one point, the plan more or less was that we would begin the projects, and somewhere in and around 2018, we would borrow $20 to $25 million in a debenture to pay those capital projects. Well, with an improving financial situation, with increased tax assessment and some activity we had within the city, we decided that we didn't need to borrow that $20 to $25 million, that we relied on cash flow and internal debt or reserves. I believe so certainly we have drawn on reserves, and that is why we now rank fairly low in that category. But because we didn't go out and borrow any further money and continue to pay off what we have each year over the last number of years, we now rank at the very top in that particular category amongst our comparators. So I think if you look at the overall financial picture, taking those 2 things into consideration, we rank above average. There are 3 above us and 6 comparative municipalities below us. At least in that snapshot, it puts us in a decent financial position. Notwithstanding what I've heard a few times mentioned tonight, that our average household income needs to improve for a number of reasons, for affordability of housing, for affordability of food security, and I know that is also a priority with this council, and we have a couple of projects hopefully coming to fruition in the next little while, which will help address that. Thank you very much.
Councillor Zapola.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to our staff, if you look at the indicators for cost of services, you look at fire, street lighting, waste disposal, waste diversion, parks, recreation programs, programming, culture, library, and assistant to the age, which is Ted. But I'm wondering if we could put any of this on our next budget deliberation and see how we can utilize some of our resources to cut back on this. This is no reflection on staff, because staff does an excellent job of what we have and keep up with what our demands are from our people. But I think there is an opportunity here for us to really look at it and say, okay, where can we bring it down to be sort of a mid-range rating on all these higher. And I know there's one there that there's not much we can do because of arbitration, but the rest of it, I think we have some responsibility to look at it during our budget deliberations.
Councillor Lauer.
Thank you, Councillor.
Madam Chair, if I can
Oh, I'm sorry. Ms. Radigan.
Sorry, through you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to provide a quick comment or response to that. Part of the M&P review had also mentioned that the reason for a municipality may spend above the provincial average can vary from strategic choices and preferences to a lack of scale that creates a higher cost structure. Spending at a particular level above the average does not necessarily translate into the service being inefficient or unnecessary. So I just wanted to reiterate that the BMA study it's a fantastic study for comparative purposes, but not for absolute purposes. It's a great study to be able to see trends and be able to make decisions as decision makers. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lang?
Through you, Madam Chair, I'll just very briefly touch on the question of dealing with the issues at budget. That is most definitely something that staff and council do address each year as part of the budget process. As council is aware, we do a comprehensive review of all budget areas, and council will recall as part of your annual budget the different categories in what's called the issues list. Quite often will identify either efficiencies that can be achieved or changes in level of services that can be achieved. Council will also have the opportunity of, throughout the year and in many different aspects, council has the opportunity to discuss and direct staff in terms of the level of service, whether an increase or decrease. So yes, most definitely it is a topic on every budget of how to get those costs down. We'll be having a pre-budget meeting in July where if there are any specific areas of service levels that council feels are higher than are required, council can direct staff to specifically focus on that level of services and provide alternatives through the budget process.
Thank you.
Now, Councillor Lauer.
Thank you, Councillor Heen. So I'm not sure what I think of this thing. We pay $1,600, so I guess it's not a huge expense, but I do appreciate the tax comparison. I think that's legitimate. I think they do that in a manner that when we actually look and decide that we're medium or we're slightly below or up, I think those are useful figures. But the rest of it takes so many caveats when you're explaining them that I almost wonder if they're more harmful than they are good. When you're talking about areas where we're spending and they're high, there seems to be an explanation for not all of them, but most of them for sure. I think of the library. Consistently, we are. This study points to the library as being an extraordinary cost, and it's over the averages. But if I'm interpreting this right, built into that cost that we include is the financing of our debenture. And that debenture, I would remind everybody, when it was taken out, there were 3 projects in play. There was the twin pads out in the West End, there was the fire hall, and there was the library. However, when you borrow from IO, they're not interested in you spreading whatever. They're assigning it all over the map. They want you to pick a project and put it on that. So in our case, we put it on the library. So the other 2 facilities look wonderful, but the library is is carrying that debt into the equation. If I've got that right, correct me if I'm wrong. So I think that significantly skews the numbers, and if that was taken out, then it might be a much more favorable number. The street lighting, I believe we just solved through the LED. I think that'll, I get that we would be high because we're still using candles. So that's going to rectify itself. And on the low end, the recreation facility, we're low there, but I'm assuming when Foundry Park opens, that's going to go up. We just increased our paving budget, so I'm assuming that's going to, anyway, it's all going to come out in the wash in the end. The only one I can't quite understand is our waste collection is considered mid-range, but our waste disposal and our waste diversion is high. And I've never actually had a discussion on how to interpret those numbers. So,
through you, Madam Chair, I'm going to start with answering the first question for the library. I just wanted to make note that under the comparator group, it is one that we use for the 30,000 to the 99,000. And so since Orillia does fall in the lower end of that scale in terms of population, it does appear that our expenses per capita look higher. So that is one of the limitations of this study. And secondly, I also wanted to reiterate that it is only the debenture interest that is included in the library line, and that will conclude at the end of 2022, I believe.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, or sorry, Madam Chair. So used to seeing the mayor up there. For the waste diversion, waste disposal, it's always challenging, and one of the challenges here is, again, the comparators with the 30,000 to 99,000. But one of the things that I can say is for waste disposal, obviously we have fairly significant costs with the landfill because of the capping and our post-closure requirements. So that would increase in those areas for us. Waste diversion, and the actual collection itself, we are very progressive as a city in diverting and ensuring we have a very solid program in place. So we would be actually increased in our costs because of the fact that we are very, very much a promoter of recycling and diversion.
Ms. Radigan.
Sorry, through you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to also include that the waste collection expenses in 2018 includes that one-time collection that the city did do, the bulk item collections, and that was a pretty large sum of that amount as well.
Councillor Eamon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I read these data. I've read them now for 5 years. I must admit they're boring to read. But what I found interesting was that we had just received in December the organizational review, if I got that right. And underpinning that review, the consultant had used BMA data, obviously from the previous year. Well, my first observation is nothing's changed, so that's reassuring that that these data aren't sensitive to give us those kind of year over year. But what was more interesting was that when these data are interpreted through the professional view of our consultant, who is bringing to us his wisdom, his learnings, his business's learnings in the context of our data and his observations, what he identified were a whole series of opportunities for us to look at how we operate this city going forward and subtly shift a little bit. He was categoric and somewhat anecdotal and outrageous in some of his comments, those, say, related to the Leacock home and things of that nature. But his advice to us, I think, in the whole, was exceptionally sound, and sound based on, in part, these data. So whether we get immediate value in the sense that I can look at it and say, there's something I can do in Ward 1. I can't. But I get the reassurance that by our participating in these data year over year, that we are not operating our city in a void. We are able to look at what's happening around this province in comparable communities and make judgments about how well or not well we're doing. And I think in the aggregate, we're doing pretty well, as the mayor just pointed out. And I think over the next year, as staff translate the operational review in the context of our strategic plan into actions for us, we will see, as Jim has suggested in our next budget, a series of recommendations, if not sooner, that will help to begin to alleviate any of our concerns in these areas. So I feel good about these data, and I urge the community to take the opportunity, because I know we'll post it at some point in the near future, to take a look at it. And if they have questions, to call us and seek clarification, because they can be confusing.
Further questions? May I ask a question from the chair? It says that 110 out of 444 Ontario municipalities participated. That's basically 1/4 of the municipalities in Ontario. So my question is, how true a picture are we actually getting when it's 1/4 of the municipalities in Ontario? Ms. Radigan?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. I do understand that it does only represent 110 municipalities out of the 444. However, part of the executive summary does identify that 110 Ontario municipalities are represented, but it does represent in excess of 85% of the population. So I would say it is a fair representation.
So can I have a mover and a seconder to accept this report? Councillor Fowlis, Councillor Campbell. So this committee recommends to Council that report Treasurer 2020-G01 dated January the 2nd, 2020 from the Treasury Department regarding the 2019 BMA Municipal Study be received as information. Thank you. Any further comments? All those in favor? It is carried. So we are now on to inquiry motions. And I have Mayor Clark and Councillor Sapola wish to move the following inquiry. That this committee recommends to Council that staff be directed to prepare a report with respect to the following: the feasibility of banning single-use plastics. Councillor Sapola.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a few facts that I've done some research, and I want to thank Mayor Clark for his support and his leadership in this. Every year, Canadians throw away about 3 million tons of plastic waste. This represents about $8 billion in lost value and waste. About 1/3 of the plastics used in Canada are for single-use or short-lived products and packaging. In fact, Canada, up to 15 billion plastic bags are used every year, and close to 57 million straws used daily. Every year, 1 million birds either are injured or die from mistaken plastic for food. And I can speak from experience on that. My dog swallowed a piece of plastic that we were walking the trail.
Councillor Support, Councillor Support, I think it's why we want the report written, and that's basically just is not up for debate at this time.
I'm sorry. I'm not debating. I'm just pointing some facts.
Okay.
Why we presented
that's fine.
the thing. No, I can speak from experience. My dog Rudy swallowed a piece of plastic while we were walking the trails. we had two decisions to make: put him down, or a very expensive operation, and we chose to do the operation. He's living with us and love him dearly. So I think we really need to do two things with this. One is create awareness within our community, and secondly, the harm that the single-use plastics create to our wildlife and our pets is astronomical. It also, Mayor Clark and I were on a function down by the park, and we looked off the dock there, and there was substantial plastic water bottles and plastic bags along the lake shore there. So I think we really have a lot of work to do to eliminate some of the plastics, and single use is one of the ways that we can start. So I hope the council will support this, report back, and then we can look at it from a more serious perspective on how we can eliminate plastics within our life. One of the things I do, chatting with my children, it says 20 years from now, my grandchildren are going to say regarding the plastics and the effects we've had on our environment and climate change through plastic is, Grandpa, why did you let it happen? And I think that's the key focus on why I'm bringing this forward. It's, maybe not for us young people that are sitting around this table, but I think for our grandchildren and their children is, why did we let it happen if we don't do something about it now?
Thank you. Councillor Raymond?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will be supporting the motion, but I have a question or a comment that leads to a suggestion for staff as they prepare the report. Unfortunately, there are consequences of doing these things, and I contacted our Economic Development Department today, and they indicate that 150 to 200 people are well employed in this industry in Orillia today. Many of them in our ward, Councillor Campbell, and though I know we're not going to, and nor should we as a municipality, put our own needs before that of the issues that Councillor Sepola has indicated. But I would ask that in preparing the report, if staff would be kind enough to hold consultations with Polyethics and Berry Plastics and any other firm in our community who's in that business, not only about the potential impact that a ban of this nature would have on their business, but to and find out and inquire what they, as a participant in that industry, are doing today, and the industry is planning to do, if not today, tomorrow, to help alleviate the issues that are going on with respect to the production of single-use plastics and the inability of the world's citizens to manage those plastics in a more environmentally fashion. Thank you.
I'm hesitant about whether we're getting into a debate at this point. We're okay? Okay, Councillor Ainsworth.
Yes, through you, Madam Chair. Happy to weigh in on this one. Definitely supporting the future vision of this, but there's always, some fun after that word. But in regards to the feasibility of banning single-use plastics, I know for me, there's no scope that is in there. Is that something that includes all single-use plastics? Are we looking at banning, the sale of them, the manufacturing of them? How is that going to happen? And if those are some of the things that are going to happen, that is a major, major project for staff, which will take a considerable amount of time and money to do that research, to get that information. Prime example that will back up what I'm saying, right now the federal government, looking at doing something similar for the country, they're spending a lot of major time on this. It's not just a simple, hey, let's just ban single-use plastics. I definitely support what we're trying to get to, but there's a whole bunch of variables there. Like, are we going to, ban stores from selling single-use plastics in regards to, if you look at anybody in the city who does sell merchandise, a majority of them are wrapped in single-use plastics. So are we going to say, well, you're going to have to get a new supplier? How are we going to make those decisions and things like that? I'd be happy to see this kind of set to a scope or to a scale and support that if we want to look at specific items or something along those lines, or if we just want to say, hey, reach out to the federal government, see what they're up to, report back on the update of that. I think that would be a much more logical decision. I don't think we would just kind of want to send them off to and I don't want to say an endless report, but there is a huge plethora of information out there on this.
Councillor Cloustra.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. My comment is very similar to Councillor Eamon's, where we should be exploring some of the interest of how the plastic repurposing industry could benefit the citizens of Orillia, or even some of the economic impacts for the city of Orillia, to look at companies that would either shred the plastics and repurpose them into plastic resins or beads, which currently we do ship a lot of our product out of the city to a manufacturer for this purpose. But I worked in the plastic industry earlier on, and that's what the company I work for did, was we shredded our plastics and was shipped out, and we repurposed it into our plastic resins again. So I think with the report, as Councillor Eamon has said, we should look at our stakeholders and see what economic impact this will have on their businesses, and how could we help them look at repurposing some of their plastics.
The final comment to Mayor Clark.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is, just a report to look into the possibility of what a potential single-use plastic ban might look like. I won't spend too much time on the next part of this, but every day, certainly I think we're all aware of the impact that single-use plastics have in our world. They're filling our landfill to some degree, and they're not all recycled. Certainly a significant impact on our natural environment. There's an island in the Pacific Ocean right now that is 1.6 million square kilometers large, and it's just all plastic. In Canada, and I hope some of these stats don't contravene what my colleague was using earlier, but they seem to be in line. In Canada, we use 34 million plastic bags a day. The U.S. uses 500 million straws per day. This became particularly apparent to me as a local issue when my wife and I and Councillor Lauer and others were pitching in on Pitch-In Day last spring, and we were doing an area of Cochrane Avenue, and there was a horrendous amount of waste and garbage there, but a lot of it was plastic. It was plastic bottles, plastic bags, and it was actually becoming absolutely entwined in our natural environment. All this at a time where we appear to have diminishing markets for recycled, for some of our recycled plastics. So this really only is we're talking about plastics that are designed to be used once. Many countries have already gone this way. Whole countries: France, Germany, Italy, the UK, and now the European Union. In Canada, it's Montreal, St. John's, the town of Blue Mountain recently, and. So this is really asking for a staff for a report that will contemplate, to Councillor Ainsworth's point, what a ban might look like. What items might be included? Is it one item? Is it 5 items? Is it 6 items? Certainly, I'm hoping and we have met with environmental services staff a couple of times to get their input, and I feel very comfortable they have a very good handle on where they will go with this, or at least what scope of research they'll do. Also, this will contemplate what a ban might look like. Is it legislated by council? Is it a voluntary ban? Is it a hybrid? Is it something that we do voluntarily for a year or two to give some of these places that are involved in the industry more time to transition to maybe a different product or a different market? And then turn it into a legislated after a year or two. So I, with my colleagues' support, I do look forward to this coming back to council. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, so can I call the question? All those in favor? It is carried. Sorry? 5-minute break? Okay. Can I have a mover? Okay, Councillor Cloustra, seconded by Councillor Lauer. Back in Quartet, is that long enough? All those in favor? Passed.
Yeah, the meeting. Oh, okay. Must have been so much. That's funny. Oh, yeah. Yeah, Ernie's got his exchange student up for, he's here the next 3 days. So, yeah, they've been touring him around and everything. So, it's an interesting one. Yeah, just for 3 days, and then Maria has to be tomorrow back to school, and then it's actually on Thursday. But pretty quick. I've got the tour. I got the real Canadian experience. Yeah.
It's stressful. Yeah, maybe I will. So thanks, Cam.
Okay, so we have a second inquiry motion from Councillor Sapola.
Madam Chair, I've had some discussions with people, and I would like to withdraw that request at this time. I need to do more. I need to do more research on it than what I've done so far. So I will withdraw it, even though it's important to some of the people that have talked to me about it, about the deadwood that's there and the effects it has on our animals. But
I may just suggest if there's not a mover and seconder, then it just doesn't go on the floor, and it is just, it's not dealt with by council. It's just that at this point where it's on the agenda, one member of council actually can't ask that something be withdrawn. So if there's no mover or no mover or no seconder, then the motion doesn't get put, and you move on to the next one.
Okay.
And supplement to Madam Chair, if I decide to bring it back, do I need a reconsideration or anything of that?
Through you, Madam Chair, no, you do not.
Okay, great. Okay. Thank you.
So may I have a mover and seconder for Councillor Sapola's motion of inquiry? Seeing none, we'll move on to our oh, thank you, Councillor Sapola. So Councillor Lauer, you have a motion of inquiry as well. Actually, you've got several.
Thank you, Councillor Heen. This inquiry has to do with our LID, which is the Low Impact Development Strategy that Council asked staff to develop a policy, I believe it was in 2018. What this does is simply ask for an update on where we're at with that policy. Actually, my intent is that it be brought forward process. We haven't had an update for a while, so I thought it would be appropriate.
So do we have a mover and a seconder for Councillor Lauer's motion of inquiry? Councillor Fallis? Okay. So moved by Councillor Lauer, seconded by Councillor Fallis, that this committee recommends to council that staff be directed to prepare a report with respect to the following: the status of the policy development that requires the implementation of low-impact development strategies into all new public and private road construction projects, road reconstruction projects, major parking lot construction and/or reconstruction projects, and major development and/or redevelopment projects where feasible, and that the report further explore options and opportunities for this policy to become a more integral part of planning, engineering, design, and budget procedures. So, okay, any discussion? So all those in favor? It is carried. Councillor Lauer, you have Another one?
Thank you again, Councillor Heen. This inquiry has to do with some of the discussions we had at the budget table. I've said numerous times how I'm concerned about how aggressive we're being with the with our stormwater rate structures. And staff is, I believe, already undertaken to bring forward a report. All I'm asking actually here in this inquiry is that we have that by the July budget meeting so that we can actually plan ahead. And if we decided that we did want to be aggressive because of that report, that we would be able to give staff adequate notice that that's what we might be looking for when we get to budget in December. This is a really interesting issue, actually. I thought it was pretty straightforward originally, and then we ended up having a discussion, the CAO and Mr. Shell. And it's a little bit more of a challenge to make it fair and equitable across the board, and there's lots of different ways of going. And so, as I understand it, that's what Andrew is going to bring forward in his report. But all I'm looking for is to make sure that we get that report at budget so that we can make some recommendations to the December discussions.
And Councillor Raymond?
Thank you, Mayor Clark. I'm totally in support of our. Did I say Mayor Clark? I'm sorry. Madam Chairman, Madam Chair, I'm ill. It's late. But I'm fully in support of our city more aggressively implementing and financing our stormwater program. Does this inquiry limit it to a rate that is charged to the ratepayer, or does it enable us to look at all funding, all financing mechanisms that would potentially contribute to a fair and equitable division of those costs across the ratepayers in our community?
Thanks, Councillor Green. Just to that point, that was one of the parts of our discussion that made this a much more complex issue to me than it was originally, in that there is a strong argument that that perhaps your aggression in regards to stormwater should be through the tax levy or through other sources of funding as opposed to the rates. So I assume that would be all part of the discussion and all part of the presentation that Andrew would bring forward.
CAO.
Through you, Madam Chair, I would confirm that it will be a comprehensive report that the department will be bringing forward, and it was my understanding they were earmarking the July pre-budget meeting for that report. Is that correct?
Do I have a second for Councillor Lowry's motion? Councillor Ainsworth? Okay. So, moved by Councillor Lowry, seconded by Councillor Ainsworth, that this committee recommends to Council that staff be directed to prepare a report with respect to the following: that options, opportunities, and impact of implementing a more equitable stormwater rate structures, and that the subject report be presented to Budget Committee in July 2020. All those in favor? It is carried. Lowry, your final inquiry?
Thank you very much, Councillor Heen. Thank Council for their indulgence. When you take that many weeks off, you get to think of a whole lot of things. This particular inquiry is just asking again for some supplementary information on a report that I believe is already going to be generated. We are expecting a report back on the collection contract that we've just received, and there'll be some alternatives in there. And what I'm asking is that if, as a part of that report, that we actually look into what in-house solutions there may be to plastic recycling. And I appreciate the inquiry brought forward initially, which is to look into eliminating single-use plastic, but certainly non-single-use plastic is still going to be an issue and a problem. And currently, I'm hoping what this report will do will spell out exactly what is happening to our plastic, because I think we may be operating under some delusions that it's out of sight, out of mind, that we're throwing it in the box, it's disappearing, so therefore it's a good thing, and we should continue using this plastic because it's being recycled properly, when in fact I'm not sure it is, and this is what this report would speak to, exactly what's going on in those regards. This add-on to the existing report that's coming forward would provide. So that's what this inquiry is about, and I'll answer any questions.
Councillor Raymond.
Thank you, Madam Chair. When I read this, I got really concerned because, as we all know, plastic recycling is a global issue. It's an issue that is affecting every community in this province, every community in this country, and it's a huge issue. And as we've already heard, the federal government is trying to address it. And all of a sudden, I'm saying, wow, here we're trying to find a made in Orillia solution. Kind of struck me as like asking Soldiers Memorial Hospital to find a cure for cancer. I mean, if what we're really saying here is we want our people to investigate, as I expect they already are, what's happening and to bring to us the latest state of the art. I realized today when I made my inquiry about the plastic industry that we have a manufacturer who has brought to Orillia a multi-million-dollar laboratory that he is located in West Orillia, is currently working with Lakehead University. I thought that program had died, but it appears it hasn't, in terms of attempting to find solutions for reusing plastics and how to create biodegradable plastics. I mean, these are academics, these are researchers, these are people who have a great deal more expertise, time, and energy than our excellent operations people have in addressing this kind of issue. So I don't want to tie up our staff on a boondoggle to come back here with something other than an update on what's available to the city of Orillia that we may not already be using and that staff are already investigating. Because notwithstanding the excellence of our staff, if we had the ability to create a solution to this problem, I would suggest we bottle it, sell it, and our financial future would be sound.
Councillor Lauer.
Thank you, Councillor Heaney. Yes, just to speak to that. No, I'm not looking for someone to come up with the ultimate answer to recycling, but I think we learned through our tender process recently completed for the waste collection, that there's a lot of risk built into that contract, and that has to do with what's going to happen to recyclables, and I think that's more of the angle I'm going at this. I'm more interested in that, should we be in charge of finding our markets or deciding where we're going to put that plastic, as opposed to just blindly handing it off to a third party and saying, okay, here, we'll pay you to get rid of this, and not knowing if it's going into a landfill or whether it's being recycled or whatever. And I'm not predicting what the answer to this report is going to be, but those are the things I'm looking for, and then as I say, it'll be added on, hopefully, to this other report that's coming forward on that contract. But certainly, no, I'm not looking for us to develop a lab and start making Legos.
Any other further comments? Do we have a seconder for? Okay.
Through you, Madam Chair, if I can, it's really important that we ensure that from a staff perspective, we understand what in fact we're reporting on. So I've certainly heard from different members of council their interpretation of this motion. And if I can just through you to perhaps Mr. Schell to clarify in fact that he is in full understanding of what is expected as part of this report. Mr. Schell's department is actually coming forward in February with an update to council with respect to the waste collection contract. And yes, there will be components of that report that talk about maybe potentially some in-house opportunities and so on. So I just want to make sure that we at staff level fully understand what is expected with this inquiry. So if I can, through you to Mr. Schell, just for confirmation.
Mr. Schell?
Through you, Madam Chair. Yes, I've been writing feverishly here to try and get everything everybody wants. That being said, I'm hoping to bring a report forward in February, which is kind of shortchanging me to get all of this stuff done. What I might suggest, because we are looking at negotiation from with our contractor for the actual contract itself, we'll try and hit on these points. They're going to be more high level and more from a financial standpoint was what I was looking to provide, and not from a trend in market and future thoughts and expectations. So what I might suggest is a further report. Ultimately, when we do go to contract, we will have the potential and the opportunity in the future to cancel the contract if we wish. And if we found that we could do better and find a better way of doing things, we could certainly cancel the contract down the road. At this point, I think I'd be a little challenged by February to get such a detailed report out to everybody.
Thank you. Mayor Clark?
Thank you, Mayor Heen. No, that really was kind of along my line of thinking. If this other report's coming back, it needs to come back in a timely fashion because of our potential negotiations with our waste collection provider. So I was just wondering if that was realistic to have that come back along the same timeline. And I'm hearing that that's going to be tough to at least bring a comprehensive report back. So I don't know. All right, that's my comment. I think that's it's going to be tough for our environmental services department to deliver in February.
Councillor Fallis.
Thanks. Through the chair, just a question to Andrew. I was curious if we were to pursue this report, we get it back a couple months down the line, are we able to hypothetically cancel part of the contract? Is that a cancel part of it, or is it kind of a one-shot full deal? Thanks.
Through you, Madam Chair. Note the tender document. Typically, we would not cancel until the 3-year point in the actual contract, but we can cancel any part or all of the contract should we wish to. Ultimately, as we move forward and the actual full producer recovery comes forward in 2023. There will be the whole Ontario government will be looking at ways to deal with the recycling. So we may well, in fact, have a producer type like Stewardship Ontario may well take over all of our recycling from us at that point. So ultimately, we may cancel the contract anyways.
Councillor Lauer?
Thank you, Councillor Heen. I'm afraid this might be sounding like it's getting a little bit more complicated than I ever intended it. So, as I understand it, to this contract, to the waste contract, there is a risk involved when it comes to certain recycling materials, right? As in risk, as in getting a market for them, finding a market for them. So you're saying, okay, here you get rid of this cardboard. And so the contractor, I believe, decides, well, let's see how much I think I can get for this cardboard. So he considers that revenue, and then he offsets whatever, and he makes an equation. With plastic, it's the same, except currently there's no real market for plastic. And so it's more of a gamble for him to get rid of this plastic. And so I think this goes back to something that was said during the budget discussions, that there's a risk involved and we're paying for that risk. And what I'm looking for is simply an in-house solution to handling that risk. So let's say we decide, okay, well, we don't want to just pay outright for the risk. We'll take the risk, which could prove to save us some money. That would mean things like, can we stockpile the plastic? How hard is it to keep the plastic in the landfill site? How long do we have before, whatever, that kind of thing. That's the kind of thing I'm looking for to be a part of that report coming forward. So it's really not that complicated. It's not that we're looking to invent a way to recycle plastic. It's a simple way of how we can address it within that contract to save ourselves money.
So do I have a second for Councillor Lauer's motion? Councillor Follis? So the motion reads that this committee recommends to Council that staff be directed to prepare a report with respect to the following: the options, opportunities, and impact of developing in-house solutions to plastic recycling. All those in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4. It is defeated. Okay. Are there any announcements? Councillor Sepola.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick announcement for anybody that hasn't seen the video or on our city's economic development campaign is up for a provincial award. And maybe Mr. Richard Bartola can explain it a little bit. But I would personally like to thank our city staff at the ED, Economic Development, especially Mr. Landry, Darcy Hoover, and Kelty Town for their efforts in putting this together. So maybe, Mr. Bartola, can you just explain it to our audience, the award that we're going to, that we're up for?
Through you, Madam Chair, the department and the graphic design folks and marketing worked on presenting a new wrapper for a lot of our economic development material. And through that, they came up with the where business meets pleasure motto, and then the graphics around it really resonate, and it's quite nice, and it's nice that the Economic Development Association recognizes it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further announcements? Okay, Councillor Sepola.
I have one personal announcement. I've had so many calls on selling of the Leacock home, and I want to make a personal announcement that I will not support during this term or during the lifetime that I live in Orillia.
Mayor Clark.
I'd like to announce that Councillor Sepola did a valiant effort to put an item on the agenda that wasn't on the agenda.
Any further announcements? We're at open public forum. Do we have anybody that wishes to?
Yes, no problem, Madam Chair. I just wanted to wish everybody a Happy New Year and recommend that they do get involved in many of the activities that are across the city. I know we spend a significant amount of money on programming and such, and I think it's important that we do get some more folks involved. So if you do have a friend, invite them out with you.
Thank you. So we're at the public forum. If anybody wishes to come up and make a statement. No? Okay, so at this point, I'll ask for a motion for adjournment. Moved by Councillor Sepola and seconded by Councillor Ainsworth. All those in favor? We are adjourned. Have a good evening.